Okay, we are live.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. It's Adam Wilson, moderator for LAFCO, and I'd like to call today's meeting to order on Monday, July 12th at 10:04 a.m. Today's meeting is the Ad Hoc Special Advisory Committee for the Rainbow Municipal Water District and Fallbrook Public Utility District reorganization proposals. So with that, welcome everybody today, and I would like to move on to item number 2, which will be the roll call by the commission clerk.
Thank you. Brian Albright.
Here.
Jack Beebe.
Here.
Rachel Cortez. Rachel is absent.
Here.
Oh.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes. Gary Croucher.
I'm here.
Nick Canettis is absent. Tom Kennedy.
I'm here.
Sandy Curl.
Here.
Lydia Romero. Lydia Romero.
Here. I'm here. I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes. Kimberly Thorner. Absent. I can't see everyone. Is Kimberly Thorner on?
No, I don't think she's here.
He's absent. Is Nick Serrano? Is he present? He's absent. So we have 1, 2. We have 7 members present with a quorum, virtual quorum. So ends roll call.
Perfect. Thank you, Tammy. I appreciate that. Before moving on, even though Nick is not with us today, I just want to make a quick announcement and notation that Nick Serrano with the City of San Diego is a new representative that will be joining us. He is replacing David Cherishore, who's no longer on the County Water Authority board. So with their new representation, just wanted to welcome Nick to the committee when he so arrives. So moving on to the next item would be item number 3, the agenda review by the moderator. At this point in time, I do not have any changes to today's agenda. So we will move on to item number 4, which is public comment. This is an opportunity for any member of the public to provide comments that are on a non-agenda item topic germane to the advisory committee. Comments will be limited to 3 minutes. And at this time, I'd like to ask Tammy, our clerk, if there have been any submitted comment slips from any members of the public to speak today.
We have not received any pre-registered for comments.
Perfect. Thank you, Tammy. We will cross that item off the list and move on to our business items for today, which is item number 5. The first one is item 5A, which is the approval of our action minutes for our June 14th, 2021 meeting. The advisory committee will review these draft minutes prepared by our commission clerk for that June 14th special meeting. The draft minutes are in action format and recommended for approval today. But before moving on, so I did notice one small minor technical correction that did need to occur. It appears that Nick Canettis, the representative for Eastern, was listed both as present and absent. And I believe Nick was absent at the time, and it should note that David Cherishore was ineligible and did not participate as a member of the advisory committee. So if we could make that clarification on the record, and at this point in time, I could also entertain a motion with those changes.
So moved as amended.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
And we have a second. Tammy, can you do a roll call, please?
Yes. Can you confirm the second for me, please?
I believe it was Lydia, right? We have a motion by Tom Kennedy and a second by Lydia. Roll call vote, please.
Okay, thank you. Brian Albright.
Aye.
Jack Beebe.
Yes.
Rachel Cortez.
Yes.
Gary Croucher.
Yes.
Tom Kennedy.
Yes.
Sandy Curl,
Yes.
Lydia Romero.
Yes.
I have 7 in favor, 0 opposed, with 3 absent. The motion passes.
Thank you, Tammy. We will move on to the next item, which is item 5B, the consultant report by Dr. Michael Hanneman. He will continue to provide an ongoing analysis related to water reliability, rate structure, and potential exit fees. And so without further ado, I will pass the baton over to Dr. Hanneman, and we can get to our main item of business today.
Can you show the PowerPoint? Thank you. Oh,
And just for clarification, the PowerPoint wasn't, or no supporting documents were available ahead of time.
That's right.
Sure. So
I have, you're right. I have some spreadsheets which I'll send you, but that's everything. It's this presentation. So if you can go on to the next slide, please. I'd said last month that by today I'd finalize my analysis of reliability and rate impacts, but I'm still working on both of those topics. I'll tell you what I've been doing and where I am. At the very end, I'll start very briefly on exit fees, which is become a major focus for next month in September. What I wanted to say also is feel free to interrupt me if you have questions. This is, the previous, in May and in June, I had a dense report and with lots of numbers, and I went through it. Today, some of the issues are coming into clearer focus. I'm going to talk about them, but I'd like this to be more of a dialogue as appropriate. So I'll start out just with some factual stuff. If you go to the next slide, with regard to the reliability analysis, I got a memo from the authority. I noticed that Met has revised its IRP analysis and made a presentation 2-3 weeks ago, but hasn't posted the detailed spreadsheets. Next slide. With regard to the rate impact analysis, I've had a correspondence with the authority. I sent some questions, they answered them. Tom pointed out an error in what I presented. I had transposed 2 numbers. I sent more questions to the authority, got a response, and just at the end of last week, sent a few more questions. Next slide, please. So basically, there are a couple of minor items which I've corrected, but they don't change anything very much. Next slide. And again, some details. So when I did my analysis last month, I looked at a single year. I looked at 2020. The authority had looked at a single year, an average of 2017, 18, and 19. Their single year analysis, or my analysis, more or less lines up with theirs. I'll say a bit more in a moment. But I didn't do a multi-year analysis, and that's something I should do. Next slide. So with regard to the single year analysis, but I'm looking at a slightly different year, but basically the impact on revenues and the impact on expenditures, rows A and B, are the same. And with regard to reserves, this is something I've asked to discuss more with the authority. In some sense, additions to reserves and withdrawals of reserves should average out, I think, subject to correction, over some period of years. In any individual year, you'll have one going on or the other, but not both. And so that would become sort of clearer in a multi-year analysis. Next slide. So that's what I want to do next. And the authority did a multi-year analysis, which they sent me. I have, and they did that in the September of 2020. I have some questions, but they looked 2021 through 2030. I plan to do the same thing. But it makes a difference. What you assume is member agency demands and local supplies in any particular year. And so figuring out about demands and local member demands and local supplies factors into the rate analysis. But it also touches on issues of supply reliability. And that the link between the two issues, two of the three issues I'm looking at, is something I'm going to comment on today. So next slide. So this is the key point. The more heavily the authority relies on MET as a source of supply in a given year, the lower the rate impact relative to if Fallbrook-Rainbow detach, relative to what it would be if the authority wasn't so reliable on MET that year. And that's because MET is the source of the cheapest water. So the more space the authority has to ditch metropolitan water, the lower the easier, the less the impact on rates. But there's a sort of trade-off between rate impacts and reliability impacts. And that's what I want to talk about. If you go to the next slide. So in a sense, supply reliability and rate impacts are two sides, different sides of the same coin. With reliability, you're worrying that demand might be too high. So as the wholesale agency, the authority doesn't have enough water. With rate impacts, you have the flip side of the coin. If demands on the authority are too low, it doesn't bring in enough revenue to cover its fixed cost. And it seems to me that the situation is changing. And which of the two problems is more serious is switching and will switch in the future to some extent. And I'm going to show you the data I'm thinking of to explain this. Next slide, please. So let me say, I started working in a heavy-duty way on urban water issues in California in the summer of 1986, when I was hired by the State Water Resource Control Board to be their economic staff, and they were starting the Bay Delta hearings. I'd been their staff for 18 months looking at agricultural water use, but urban water use came onto my agenda as the staff economist for the state board. And things really have changed strikingly between the hearings, 6 months of hearings that I attended in 1986 and today. We talked in 1986 about the need for California to increase its use of recycled water, treated wastewater. But for 20 years, nothing really happened. And if you look at 2005 and you look at the, I think the number was like 600,000 acre foot being recycled in California in 1985, and I think that barely changed for 20 years. It is now changing big time at a rate which surprised me. And this is a key point of the issue for the for LAFCO. There's a shifting landscape, and that makes things difficult. Next slide. So let me first point out that with water infrastructure, you have to, it takes time to plan and to construct, and you have to, you develop new supply infrastructure ahead of demand, because it can take 20, 30 years in some case to actually get stuff in place. So as a graduate student, I studied urban water supply in Massachusetts, the Metropolitan District Commission. The big reservoir that supplies the Boston metro area was built in the 1930s, and it really wasn't being fully used until 40 years later. The State Water Project, as you know, starts in 1963. As far as Met is concerned, it started paying, and it was paying whatever, 49% of the fixed costs. It started paying in 1963, and it didn't really ramp up its use of the water till the mid-1980s. That was a big focus of the Bay Delta hearings in 1986. And you have a similar story, somewhat similar with the Central Arizona Project. Next slide, please. And in terms of the authority, you know, the authority develops a new strategy in the light of the experience it had with Met in 1991. And so it starts negotiations with Imperial, I believe, in 1995. With this and with other things, I may have the numbers a little wrong, and Sandy or whatever can correct me afterwards. But you have the authority changes its strategy in the 90s, and now 20 years later, you know, we're getting the fruits and also facing the financial consequences. Next slide, please. And so the point is, given the lead time, given the fact that water supply infrastructure is mainly capital costs, you can't move forward without getting financing. You can't get financing without commitments from the prospective suppliers and users. And then suppose it happens that there's an unexpected downward shock in demand. The train is already rolling. And you hadn't anticipated a negative shock to revenue, and that's a challenge. That's an issue for Metropolitan as well as the authority. It's an issue for any large wholesale supplier anywhere in the country. It plays out differently a bit for Met and the authority because there are different stages in their infrastructure cycle. Met got going in the 1960s, and major sort of commitments were made in the 60s, and then in the 90s with Diamond Valley, and prospectively in the next decade with the Delta fix. The authority sort of got going later, and whatever 30 plus years later than Met, and so its major commitments are in the last 20 years. The longer the time that elapses between the commitment to finance infrastructure and a future negative shock in demand, the less serious the impact, because demand is growing over time. And also, and this is an economic factor, in the beginning, in the first years of a new project, the costs are overwhelmingly fixed costs, not variable costs, because the capital costs are fixed costs. You make commitments or you take out bonds, and you're repaying the historical cost from the time you made the commitment or took out the bond. Over time, inflation pushes up the operating costs. Doesn't push up the capital costs because they're fixed largely. So what happens is, as time passes, as decades pass, the O&M costs become a larger share of the annual payments. And as I'm going to explain, the share of, and some of the O&M costs, not all of them, are actually variable. And the balance of variable and fixed costs is a key consideration. Next slide, please. So let's look at the situation in San Diego County. You have to distinguish between water use in the authority's service area and water sales. This is water use. And so the service population has grown significantly in San Diego County, but per capita use has fallen even more. And that is striking. That's, I didn't expect that in 1985. And basically the big reduction in per capita use, I think, occurred after 2007 with the housing recession, but then with the drought in 2008, 2009. But it's not just that water use fell. Local supplies have been growing, particularly in the last decade. And so sales by the authority have fallen even more than demand in the service area has fallen. And that's the next slide. So if this is sales, and you see sales were 600,000 acre foot, you know, from 2000 and probably a bit before then. And then if you look, they're now down to 350,000 acre foot. Next slide. So water use fell in round terms by about 36%, but water delivered fell by even more, and that reflects the growth in local supply. As we look forward over the next 10 or 15 years, local supplies are going to ramp up even more, especially from increased water reuse. And that will lower the authorities' deliveries to member agencies. Is everybody with me right now? Then I'll keep moving. Next slide, please. So if we're talking of increased local supplies, By or basically the next 3 or 4 years, we have about 15,000 acre-foot coming online from Fallbrook, Helix, and Padre Dam. These are numbers from the urban water management plans. And then San Diego is going to bring on basically 110,000 acre-foot by 2035, in installments. But this is unprecedented, over 40 or 50 years. Reuse is finally taking off in California, not just in San Diego, but in many urban areas. Next slide. So, Sandy, this is from a presentation that Kelly Gage made to, I think, your board of directors at the end of June. So I've stolen your slides. There are things you may want to explain to me. So everything I'm saying is sort of provisional. But what's striking about this is the authorities' sales were well over were over 400,000, well over 400,000 for 2 or 3 decades. But for the next 2 decades, they'll basically be at or below 400,000 acre-foot most years, which is a very significant change. It reflects conservation, which has really been a phenomenon in California, since Governor Schwarzenegger and the 20 by 2020 and the 2008-2009 drought. But also, as I've said, recycling is being taken seriously on a scale that didn't happen before. Next slide, please. So again, this is from Kelly's presentation, and it distinguishes the supplies that the authority controls, namely Colorado River water and the Carlsbad desal plant, with the yellow, which is Metropolitan, the other source of supply for the authority. And if you factor in detachment, which I believe isn't factored into this, depending upon when it would occur, it would reduce sales by about 20,000 acre-foot a year during the coming decade. Next slide. Now, this has significant cost implications, because once the authority delivers less than 320,700 acre-foot, it's delivering water from the Colorado River or from Carlsbad, which is a fixed cost because it's made take or pay commitments for both those water. The numbers here are for calendar year 2021, but they show 13% of the water is desal, which is the most expensive, and I haven't given the other percentages, but you get the picture. So the blue water is more expensive, but it's also more reliable than the yellow water. And that's how these two issues of rate impacts and reliability sort of come together. And in fact, you could say these two issues of rate impacts and reliability collide. Next slide, please. So this is just the 2020 breakdown, the calendar, fiscal 2020, and the costs of the calendar 2020 costs. But so for 2020, the authority supplied 354,000 acre-foot, and 270 came from its own supplies, the Colorado River and Carlsbad. Next slide, please. So This is rather dense. Let me just say this in words. What I'm doing is I give the
Dr.
example.
Hanneman, can we pause you for 1 second? I think
Of
we have
course.
some hands up and some questions.
Oh, I'm so
on
sorry. Yeah,
some of the points that you-
I was only, yes, please.
Andy?
Yes. Go ahead.
Yeah, Dr. Hanneman, if you could go back about
Yes.
3 slides to the one that you said you used,
Yes.
one more,
Yes.
this one. I wanted to make a point about this slide. While this slide only denotes the city's pure water project, which is the largest of the local supplies coming on, it includes all of the local supplies that you had outlined in the previous slide,
Yes.
I think one ahead. So
Yes.
just wanted to make the point that it includes all of those local
Yes.
supplies
Yes.
anticipated coming online. Secondly, I'd like to add that your cost for the Colorado River water versus Met water, I do not believe is correct. And so we need to go back on that and clarify that, because the Colorado River water in full cost is actually less than the Met water. So I wanted to point that out as well. And then the third thing is, I think you really hit on it, which is conservation. The per capita use is down 50% from 1990.
Yes.
And, you know, it really speaks to the ethic here in San Diego County of what people have done with conservation. So that has been quite significant and has been able to mitigate the need for more supplies than would have previously been needed. So just wanted to make those couple comments.
Let me just say yes. And I'd like to extend some of these charts to 1990. I wanted to show the per capita. I don't have at hand tables with the numbers. And I was going to ask for your staff's help to round up some of them. And for example, the 2000 Urban Water Management Plan, I don't have right now at hand. And so I've used numbers and I've showed diagrams based on sort of what I had at hand. And in my report, I'll get the real numbers and I'll produce my own charts. So I was, I'm being lazy for now.
No, appreciate that. And I guess the other comment I would make, the challenge with looking at a 1 year, 2020, we had a wet year. And so a lot of local surface water was used. Our projections for this next year are 390,000 acre feet in sales. Due to the dry conditions, due to less availability of surface water. And therein lies the conundrum of looking at 1 year and the fluctuations that occur. And at the end of the day, you've got to have sufficient supplies regardless of what the demands are. So
just on this, let me say, what I plan to do is this. I had, some questions about these numbers and details of the numbers that I asked Pierce on your staff, and we're going to talk later this week. But after those discussions and anybody else's comments, what I do is I'd come up with a proposal for, let's say, a 10-year forward-looking span with the numbers I'm going to use for sales. And I'd circulate that to the whole committee before actually doing the analysis with those numbers. So I'd let you know before I'm doing how I'm going to do a multi-year analysis so everybody can comment. And then I'll do the multi-year analysis. So, and I'm still, for example, I'd still like to talk with Pierce before I can do that. And so what will happen for next month is between now and our next meeting, I will have sent a memo saying sort of how I plan to do a multi-year rate impact and get your comments, but I won't have done the analysis probably because by the time you respond, there won't be enough time to do that. So I'll actually do the multi-year analysis for the September meeting. This is how, and I was going to mention this at the end, but I need to have more interaction with the authority, with you, Tom, with you, Jack, with Nick at Eastern. And so it'll slow things down for next month, but it won't stop me, from being able to pull things together for September. So I just wanted to explain that. Tom, did you have a comment?
I don't have any specific comments at this point, but I do appreciate that you've highlighted the challenges the Water Authority as a whole faces with or without detachment. This is something I've said in open session at the Water Authority many times, is that the Urban Water Master Plan continues to these sawtooth edges where we show demand going up in between each iteration of a new local supply coming on, but there's also an equal possibility demand won't go up or if it just stay flat. At which point, by 2034, it's reasonable to assume, even without detachment, that we're going to drop below the contracted number. And I said this to the board, I would predict this is going to happen prior to 2030. Fortunately, within the QSA, I think 2034, there's a time where there's a price reset and particularly perhaps some contractual opportunities to right-size some of those contracts. Those are contracts, not so much, there was some like the canal lining and things like that was done in the conservation, but it's a little different than building a new pipeline or something like that. So to compare it against the state water project is, a little bit different. So there are opportunities to shield yourself from some of those impacts in the future. But I think we can all agree that having take or pay water for all your supply is not the greatest thing.
Adam, was the other hands raised?
Yeah, I see Kane's hand
Sure.
go up and then down. Just want to make sure he
If you
has an opportunity.
Yeah, no, well, Sandy's exchange was very helpful, or questions in your responses were helpful. I guess one question I did have, and I apologize, if you could go back to the slides where you had Professor, the graphic of that 300,000 acre feet. There we are. So in layman terms, for my benefit, I was curious, does that suggest, could it also be interpreted that any supplies that are above that 300 and something, the blue line, is profit, and any sales below that is a loss in the here and now?
No.
No, go ahead, Sandy.
We don't do profit and loss, number one. Number two, if we found ourselves in that situation, the Water Authority would look at ways that it could transfer out its resources to other agencies who are in need, which is an opportunity that we're looking at right now, just because others in California are in an extremely difficult situation with no water. And we're trying to see if the sources that we have can provide some assistance in that. So that's why I would say no.
Also, there's a cost of service analysis each year. And as Sandy said, you and other public water agencies are not for profit. And so the rate structure would be adjusted, to reflect.
And just for my benefit, when I say for profit or loss, I appreciate this is not a money-making activity, but profit meaning you're recovering your costs versus not recovering costs. But so I understand, and Sandy's explanation is helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, I would just add to Dr. Hanneman, in any case, we are going to recover our expenses. And therein lies the conundrum with a detaching agency, because if you're detached, you aren't subject to the obligations of the Water Authority that have been made on behalf of all of the member agencies.
Jack, I think you're next in line with your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Adam. So I appreciate the presentation. I'm a little worried that we're playing into a lot of theoreticals in terms of what the future holds. So I think what Sandy said is important, is this idea that the water authorities contracted for supplies, but they haven't built infrastructure for the QSA water, right? We didn't build a pipeline. They're looking at doing that now, but right now there's no fixed pipeline. So there is potentially the ability to deliver that supply to another party. And so there's a lot of theoreticals out in the future. I know you're also talking about, well, maybe their rates will change in the future, but maybe they won't. So I'm a little worried about, coming up with a whole series of theoreticals at this point. I know the water authority is working on their long range financial plan. And I think that plan is just using existing rates. What you're showing, Dr. Hanneman, isn't, has been known for a while, but the rates are, what they are. So I think, what you've done already sort of shows the magnitude of our impact. The one thing you also noted is, Fallbrook's going to roll off about half its supplies. So that projection going forward, is what it is. And the water authority, as Sandy said, has some opportunities to adjust for that, right? If they know their demands are lower, there's potentially some adjustments to make on the supply side, which is the biggest cost. I mean, that's the biggest cost driver are those supplies. So I'm just hopeful we don't get too, theoretical about the future in this, because then I'm worried we'll never get to an end point. Thanks.
Could I just say, so Jack, I understand, but we don't know the future. And you guys who are in the trenches have a better idea of the future than I do, sitting in Berkeley. So I'm not. But the problem with water infrastructure is it's so damn long-lived. And the problem with water finance is so much is a fixed cost that you have to look to the future. In fact, I'm going to suggest at the end that I think too much of the governance in the authority and other urban water agencies is backward looking at who used the water in the past and who paid for it, and not enough is forward looking to who's actually going to be using the water and the expenses we incur in the next 20 years. And so what I'm just saying is these forward-looking issues, I think, are of the essence with water infrastructure. And the future is always unknown, but also some of what happens in the future depends on policies, pricing policies, sharing policies, other management policies that are sort of in your hands collectively. But let me say, what I wanted to do was to kind of lay out my thinking on this with the idea that in the next, in the August meeting in September and October, you can hash some of these things out. So I'm kind of trying to point out the problem area, and and how that gets resolved by this committee. It's this committee in the first instance that has the task of thinking through this, and secondly, LAFCO staff, and then thirdly, the commission. And so what I'm trying to do, in particular today, is to sort of show the treacherous landscape or the mountainous landscape that needs to be crossed, but how one actually does an analysis that covers that terrain. I want to sort of handle through interactions with you at this meeting, comments subsequent to the meetings, Zooms or whatever. But so your point is well taken, Jane.
Keen, do you have another question or comment?
Very quickly, in the professor kind of answered or made the comment I was going to make to Jack, and that is, Jack is correctly pointing out, hey, if one of our ad hoc committee members have questions or pauses about some of these assumptions. And LAFCO has tasked the professor in making assumptions in generating these 3 memorandums that are going to address these 3 related topics. It's important that you speak up, as Jack did, because LAFCO staff is going to assume that in absence of the ad hoc committee members commenting otherwise, that you are good with the assumptions. So again, thank you, Jack, for flagging a question you had, and I would encourage the other 9 members, as the professor goes through this and outlines these assumptions, please do the same. So thank you.
Thanks, Keen. I don't see any other members wishing to speak. So Dr. Hanneman, if you'd like to continue your presentation.
Adam, if the hands raised or whatever, let me know, because I'm just looking at the screen.
No
which shows. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so I was going through, go back one slide, So I wanted to go through an example, and I'll just simplify. There's a lot of words here. So if you look at Met's contract with the California Department of Water Resources for State Water Project. So for calendar 2020, Met was committed to paying basically $156 million. And that was calculated by taking its table A amount of 1.9 million and applying, and there are 2 components, 2 main components, the delta charge and the transportation charge. And the delta charge is all a fixed cost. So I'm illustrating a point about fixed costs. So the delta supply rate was $81 an acre foot, and multiplied by 1.9 million acre feet gives you $156 million. But the table A numbers are at this point no longer real. So Met had been expected to receive 1.1 million acre feet in calendar 2020. So $156 million for 1.15 million acre feet is $136 an acre foot. But Met actually received just under 400,000 acre feet. It still paid $156 million. So for the delta charge was actually $390 an acre foot. But because this is a take or pay contract, if it takes less water, the unit cost goes up. The total cost doesn't go down. It was still $156 million an acre foot. And so that's the thing with fixed costs. If the unit volume goes down, the unit price goes up. You don't save money. That's the key challenge of fixed costs. So next slide, so just to round out, Met also pays transportation charge and revenue bond. Part of the transportation charge is a fixed cost, part is variable. Overall, if you look at what Met paid for state water, for the State Water Project water last year, 74% of what it paid was a fixed cost, 26% was a variable cost. Next slide. As you know, Met also gets water from the Colorado River. Even more of the Colorado River is fixed cost because it doesn't actually pay anybody for the water. It pays for electricity to pump the water, but that's all. Next slide, please. So if you put this all together, my estimate is of Met's total cost in, so this is the planned budget. Met does a CAFA only every 2 years. So I have the authorized budget for fiscal 20, but I don't have the actual budget. So anyhow, subject to that proviso, it looks to me that while Met is spending in round terms $1.8 trillion only 12% of that is a variable cost. 88% is a fixed cost. Next slide. If you compare that with the authority, about 25% of the authority's cost is a variable cost and 75% is a fixed cost, compared to 12% variable for Met and 88% fixed cost. And there's a basic logic to that. When you go from the original diverter who diverts water and then sells it to, say, another wholesaler who sells it maybe to another wholesaler or a retailer, as you go down the supply chains, more of the costs become variable costs, less become fixed costs. Let me go on to the next slide. So that's the cost side. So the challenge for managing a water agency is if the ratio of fixed and variable costs doesn't match the ratio of fixed and variable revenue. If those two ratios are very different, you have a lot of variable revenue, but a lot of fixed costs. That's a big problem if you then have a supply reduction. It puts a big pressure on a water supply agency. That is the single most difficult economic feature of water supply. Next slide. So if we look at the revenue side, my understanding is about 76% of Met's revenue is variable. That is, if it sells an acre foot less, most of that, 3/4 of that is lost revenue. Again, compare that next slide with the authority. Only 63% is variable revenue. And that's because of the fixed charges that the authority has introduced. The infrastructure charge, the service charge, the storage charge, the supply reliability charge. And those were deliberately introduced by the authority to make its revenue less volatile. Next slide, please. Yeah, so as I said, as a water supplier, you're in a good situation if the balance of fixed versus variable revenues lines up with the balance of fixed versus variable costs. And that's not true for any water supply in the country. So it's a matter of degree. But you can see right now the authority is closer to that balance than Metropolitan is. That means the authority is financially less vulnerable. And it's very clear that Metropolitan is going to have to raise the fixed component of its charges. Now, let me say the member agencies have to agree. The board of directors has to vote this, but Met has emphasized this in the white paper for the board of directors done, I think, in December 2019 that kicked off the IRP process. And it repeats this in the Urban Water Management Plan, which was just signed off at the end of June. If Met raises its fixed charges, that's financially beneficial to Met, but it's always harmful to Met's customers. If you are buying water, you want the charges to be variable as much as possible. So if you receive 1% less water, you pay 1% less. That won't happen if you face fixed costs. And that's, you know, the source of concern for Fallbrook and Rainbow. I'm pointing out that what's good for the provider financially is not good for the customers. But I'm just saying, it seems, I don't know what the Met's board of directors will decide, but it seems to me the pressures on Met are going to drive it at some point in this next decade to changing its rate structure.
Dr. Hanneman, pause you again. We have another question
Of
from
course, sure.
Tom Kennedy.
Yes.
Thanks, Adam. Just two quick comments on this. One, in that I agree the Water Authority does have a more robust fixed charge system than Met at this time. Those charges are based on 3 and one of them 5-year rolling averages. So they're kind of an analog to deliveries. They just have a little time factor of delay before they happen. But the large scale, like you showed the impacts of the local supply development, those will kick in reducing the obligation of those agencies, obviously in a much greater part than ours. And so I would also like to point out that whether we're a member agency of Eastern or the Water Authority, when Met changes its rate structure, those are going to get passed through to our ratepayers either way. And so if, like Jack was saying earlier, hypothetically, all the member agencies decide to change it, Water Authority being a member agency and Eastern being a member agency, it's going to impact them however they decide to change it. What that looks like, I don't know. I know that within the Water Authority, people like Gary Arant with Valley Center have proposed many things by doing it by a per capita basis, by doing it by assessed valuation, something unrelated to water supply. That's never gained traction so far amongst the member agencies.
No, so you're right, and I will note that some of the fixed charges, not the infrastructure one, but are based on sales. And maybe the authority needs to refigure its fixed. At one extreme, you have a take or pay contract. And so a water wholesaler could, in theory, want to do the same with the member agency. So your point is well taken, but the need for fixed charges, I think this is an issue that will affect many water agencies in California. I mean, that's the sense in which, regardless of the particular circumstances of the authority vis-a-vis Met or Rainbow vis-a-vis the authority, this is kind of a systemic issue.
Yeah, at the retail level, we collect an even higher percentage of our fixed revenue, our fixed cost is fixed revenue. We're trying to get to 100% if we could, but we're shooting to get to 75% in that range. Our customers tell us about it all the time, about how they have to pay $100 before they take a drop of water. But that is a challenge that we all face.
No, and so it occurs to me, the LAFCO may find itself in the unfortunate position of being the first sort of governing entity in California to have to think about this. Now it may have no legal authority. These are issues, A, which have been raised, and B, which are way beyond my competence. But there's a sense in which you are the canary in the mine, this issue, for California as a state. The other thing I'd say is, if Met goes to a fixed rate component, the authority as a customer of Met will face that the same way Eastern as a customer will face that. But the authority is probably less reliant on Met than Eastern. I'm going to say that, but the details matter. And I don't know what Met will decide. I don't know what Eastern will decide, and I don't know what the authority will decide. But my point is, I'm trying to lay out the difficulty of the issues, and I'm not. Putting.
Yeah, well, there's been 10 plus years of litigation on how Met allocates its rates, whether on transportation or whatnot.
I know.
And, with an assertion that it's unfair to the Water Authority that they're paying for more, the litigation is ongoing. Some of the results of that weren't as positive as the Water Authority and all of us in the Water Authority might have liked, but here we are.
Keen, I see your hand up again.
Professor, so would you anticipate incorporating into your analysis on topic 2, rate impacts, some notional or amount of a met rate increase?
I mean, at this point, no, because I don't know what to assume. So where I'm going, and this will come up on a later slide, is pointing out that Fallbrook and Rainbow. So this next slide or so that's going to come up kind of says, under the arrangement contemplated now, I think, Rainbow and Fallbrook will face a purely variable charge if they get water from Eastern. But I have a letter, Tom and Jack and also Nick, with some questions that I want to email you right after the talk. So I don't, but if Met changes its rate structure, that will impact the rates Rainbow and Fallbrook face. I don't, at this point, unless, you know, there's some documentary discussion or whatever, I can't go beyond that because I don't know what Met will do. But it's something to think about, both for Rainbow and Fallbrook, and I'm sure you've thought of that, and for Nick, for Eastern. But it's something for, so the rest of the advisory committee to think of and for the staff to think of. So it's like I'm sticking an unexploded landmine in front of everybody. I don't know how to I don't know how to resolve it, but it's kind of sitting there.
Sandy, did you have your hand up or did you have your... You're good? Sorry, you were muted. Okay. Okay, Dr. Hanneman, if you want to keep continuing, I think everybody's...
Yes. Thanks. So let's go to the next slide. So I was saying, so first, I wrote here, if I understand the arrangement correctly, and just to repeat, I drafted a memo to Eastern, Fallbrook, and Rainbow asking these questions. I'm going to describe the memo on the next slide. On this slide and the next slide, I'm basically saying I may misunderstand things. So the bottom line is, if Fallbrook and Rainbow just get the water for, actually I did an arithmetic, it should be 115, not 1115, not 1125. There'd be no fixed costs. It would be purely variable costs. Let me just go to the next slide. Here are the two questions, the groups of questions. If Matt introduces fixed charges, how would this affect Fallbrook? And my typos are coming out. It should be FPUD. I'll fix these, and then do you give you the corrected one to post? And then there's this business of supply reliability. The next slide. Yes, so I've written a memo with whatever 4 or 5 questions that I'd like to send to Eastern, Fallbrook, and Rainbow. And I've asked both sort of how, underlying this is the question, would Fallbrook and Rainbow be treated exactly like other wholesale major customers like Hemet or Paris or San Jacinto? Would there be some differences? And, you know, if so, what differences? I've seen some things written by the authority. I don't know if, you know, they're supported. So with regard to this set of questions, the best way is I'll send you the memo right after we're done this morning, and there can be Zooms or email correspondence or whatever the authority may have, and other members of the advisory committee. So it's more, there's a set of issues, and I realized as I was preparing for today, I didn't really understand, but there are a number of questions I really don't understand the answer. And so I thought this kind of written or conversation would be needed before I can go any further, because I'm not sure really what's going on.
Tom, I think you have your hand up.
Yeah, just real quickly, on a previous slide, Dr. Hanneman, there was a reference as I was trying to read it that will be roughly as dependent on MET as the water authority was in 1991.
Yes.
I think that's fair to say when we don't have access to the water authority's IED supplies, but Metropolitan isn't the same as it was in 1991. There's a little thing called Diamond Valley Lake and ICS and other things that have improved Metropolitan's reliability considerably since that time. It's kind of weird because both the water authority and MET had parallel tracks to do these investments, which we paid for on both sides of it. But it's not to say that the reliability is the same as 91.
Well, no, so let me say, I said the reliability on MET.
Right.
So MET has, as you say, Diamond Valley Lake, and I was on the Blue Ribbon, advising MET's Blue Ribbon Committee in 1992, discussing the financing of, that's really how I first ran into these issues. But what I want to say is there's a sense in which the Delta has got worse. I mean, the State Water Project reliability, and the Colorado, just with the, decades-long drought. I mean, whatever, since the millennium drought on the decade. But yes, things, you're right, that things have changed. But there is sort of an analogy, some analogy, to the authority in 1991, and but I don't want to overstate it.
Jack, I think you had your hand up next.
Sorry, thanks, Adam.
No problem.
And I know Nick Canetis isn't here, so we can respond to it in writing. But just to be clear, the arrangement is essentially to become a member agency of Eastern, like all the other member agencies. So I know there's been some discussion that somehow we're going to be the ugly stepchildren or treated differently, but it's essentially, we're a member of the Water Authority right now, and that comes with certain rules and cost structure. And so instead of being a member like the other members of the Water Authority, we'd be a member of Eastern like the other members of Eastern. That cost structure that they've outlined is the cost structure for wholesale members of Eastern. So that's, I think if you look at that, you look at their reliability memo they wrote that sort of explained how they planned, to deal with their allocation and allocate that water among their member agencies. We're going to be similar to those other member agencies. That's the structure of, the MOU, and the MOU was just to lay out, hey, this is our current cost structure.
Right. So thank you, Jack. What puzzled me actually was this detail. I'd seen reference to $11. And so what I wrote in the sheet that's passed, but it's repeated in my memo, is this. The MET rate is whatever, $1,104 this year. Right. And $11 on that, if I add up correctly, is $1,115. But Eastern's current rate is, I don't know, something like $200 more an acre foot to Hemet and Paris. I quote the number. I took this from Eastern's current rate. So I didn't know if there was a rate difference between what you were expecting to pay and what Hemet would pay if you joined this year. In other words, and that's what threw me.
I think we can answer it, and I think it's probably a detail within that that can be explained, but it is similar. So it's not a special rate that was developed. in Fallbrook.
Okay, I mean, that's what
Yeah.
I was thinking, and that's why I asked these questions. But
Yeah.
as I say, I really am asking the questions because I don't know, not because
Yeah.
Thanks. Sandy, I think you were next in line. Sorry, you're muted, Sandy.
Once a day, even
Yeah.
after 16 months, sorry. Along the lines you were just talking about, a couple of things, is the retail Eastern agencies get and pay a lot more to Eastern than what had been outlined in Fallbrook and Rainbow's proposal. So I want to make sure we're clear and not being misled here. And those two agencies were very clear in their submittal that they're not buying into the reliability of Eastern. And I think in your list of questions, Dr. Hanneman, what you're asking is, what are you going to be paying, right? And that therein lies the services that will be provided. I think that's all I want to say at this point.
Thanks, Sandy. Keen, you're next. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Professor, with respect to topic one, the reliability, in the way we've kind of framed it to you is, Professor, tell us if there is a substantive difference in the reliability of the water supplies of Met/Eastern on one side and then Water Authority on the other side. You made a comment that at least was interesting to me. Maybe it's common knowledge that the Delta is less reliable now than it was before. I'm curious. So, and relative to how you use these terms, is the Delta supply today significantly less reliable or just simply less reliable?
and the California Water Plan is constantly saying, as part of our strategy, we need to increase recycling. And it wasn't happening even for 20 years. I am really struck by how that is gaining speed now. Technology has changed. We have direct potable reuse, et cetera. Well, I also think, because I've been looking at the Delta, issues also over this whole period of time, I do have a sense that there's a bigger crisis. And let me say, what struck me, I'm forgetting the date and I'm forgetting the name, but in around 2005, 2006, a report was published about the Delta Islands. So everybody, the Delta was reshaped, the levees were built, and this created areas where farmland and channels for the water to flow. And, everybody knew, I'm talking about in 2000, in 1990, and even in 2000, everybody knew. So the levees were built a long time ago, they sort of aged, they haven't necessarily been maintained, perfectly. It was really after Katrina and the impact on the New Orleans flood defense system. Two scientists, I know one of them, I'm forgetting the names. Anyhow, there was a LiDAR mapping of the Delta, and it turned out that peat soils had eroded more than thought. So these islands, the soil level, the ground level was in some cases 25 foot below the water level outside the levees. And the significance of that was if, because of an earthquake or a storm or something, an island flooded, you couldn't pump it out. Sorry, correct me. If 2 or 3 islands flooded at the same time, they would be lost because we don't have the physical capacity on the West Coast. Well, and you remember 6 months after Schwarzenegger became governor, on a sunny day in June with nothing going on, one of the levees collapsed. And it cost California over $100 million to repair it. And there was one island. And as I say, if 2 or 3 islands got flooded at the same time out of the 30 or so islands, that would be lost. And so suddenly, and this is what changed, and this is the answer, there was an awareness that the whole Delta system was at risk and basically would not survive to 2050, or certainly to the end of this. That changed the complexion of the problem. And that led to the discussions, which started in 2008. PPIC started a report. We need a Delta fix. There was no perception of a need for a Delta fix before about 2005, 6, 7. And that's changed the tenor of the decision. The recognition that basically this water transfer system that, the levees were built in the early part of the 20th century, they will not survive. They will not survive climate change, let alone an earthquake. And so that means a big investment in something to make the state water project and the CVP work, but particularly the state water project. I mean, to make the transportation of water from the northern part of the Delta to the southern, to make that safe for the future. I'd say that is a change in consciousness, which, having lived through it, I can, tell you from my own experience, but also from the literature. And I'm going to mention this in the next slide, but suddenly there is, a big, whatever, $15, $20 billion price tag on making the Delta safe, I'd say, for, whatever the next, there's sea level rise is happening and at a faster rate. So I describe the situation as a clear sense that the system is doomed. When will it die? When will it break? I don't know. But this is a little like, a person doesn't exercise, smokes, eats the wrong food, and goes to his doctor, and the doctor says, you've got to change your lifestyle and your diet. Otherwise, you'll get a heart attack. And the patient says, doctor, tell me what year I'd get the heart attack. It's like, it's the same thing. The prognosis is really that this system is broken, and it's going to be very expensive to fix, whether it's a single tunnel, a double tunnel or something. It's really a major problem for all of us who rely on the Delta. And as I say, it really blossomed like 2005, 6, 7. I have behind me the PPIC report that first wrote about that. So I'll stop and Tom and Sandy, other people may have a different view. I'm just saying I have been following this issue. I wrote a history of Delta decision-making. It was published as a journal article in 2009. And I worked on I was the economic staff of the State Board in 1986, 7, 8, 9 for the Bay Delta decision-making. So I happen to have sort of been, a bystander watching this, as it were, at the edge of the volcano as this has changed from 1986 onwards. So others, also have as much experience and may have a different view, but
Sandy, do you have another question or comment?
And just a comment, I agree with you, Dr. Hanneman, wholeheartedly, and I would add to that climate change
yes,
and the hydrology. And in fact, this year, Met's getting 100,000 acre feet of water from the Bay Delta. So, it's challenged on many, many fronts.
and let me just say, I worked on the climate change because I helped co-direct California's Climate Scenarios Project from 2003 to about 2012. But the shocking thing is the recognition that the Delta Islands were sort of doomed if 2 or 3 of them failed at the same time, because they weren't 5-6 foot deep. Some of them were 25 foot deep, and draining, 5-6 feet of flooding is much easier than draining 25 foot of flooding. And it's not that we didn't know about climate change, but I think that was an even bigger change, the recognition of the fragility of the delta levees, and the fact that this damage would be irreversible at some point in time, just with the aging of the levees, period. And then you add earthquakes and you add climate change, and it's really a more negative view.
Jack, do you have another question or comment?
Yeah, I'm just, I think this discussion has been interesting, and I, the detailed analysis Dr. Hanneman did, I think, I agree with it. What it presents is a lot of the challenges, statewide we face. I'm just trying to make sure, we're not trying to solve issues that are larger than what we're really looking at here. And I agree, the Bay Delta's got challenges. There's going to have to be investments to shore up the Bay Delta for sure. I think everyone agrees on that. What those are is being worked out. Colorado River system has some major challenges as well in terms of the allocation of those supplies. So I think we all acknowledge that. I think, part of the benefits of the Met system is the fact that you have access to both the Colorado River and the Bay Delta. Is you're not, with climate change, you're going to need flexibility. That's going to be the lesson of climate change. It may be rainy in Northern California and dry in the basin states. You might have a big event. You need to be able to capture that water. It may be rainy locally. And that's why for Fallbrook, we have, the ability to capture local water. And that's what I see the solution is, multiple sources of supply and leveraging those resources. That said, I don't know that solution, or trying to get into the details of that is gonna, we could spend 10 years, 20 years, working through the Bay Delta and Colorado River. We could spend a decade trying to deal with what's been an endemic wholesale fixed cost versus variable cost issue, and what that cost issue. I think that's a lot of what drove Tom and I on this process is you tend to over allocate costs to water users, right? Because a lot of the cost is just by having access to water, and so those costs really should be reallocated based on basically that basic access. That ability to get water is worth something. And should you be allocating that cost that way? And that's part of, our concern that essentially, hey, we've been overpaying for investments of which provide us not the same benefit. The amount of water you use doesn't directly relate to the benefit you get from some of those investments. So I think all that's well taken. I'm just not sure how we are, if we're going to try to tackle all these issues and bring it back into this versus getting back to what the original focus is what's really this cost impact, and are, Fallbrook and Rainbow going to be wholly unreliable if they're on Eastern and Metropolitan, like a large percentage of Southern California. And so that's just my hope, is that we're maybe we could, have some sort of plan laid out of how to get to some type of finish line, because I'm worried we're sort of heading in a direction where we're just bringing more items up to talk about versus focusing on how to put them all in perspective for, the 4,000 acre feet a year Fallbrook's going to need from Eastern.
Keen?
I hear you, Jack, but I also think that we have asked the professor to tackle 3 topics, and part of that is to disclose things that he can make assumptions on versus, in his words, put a landmine out there and just tell everyone, hey, there's a landmine out there, be careful. So I hear you. I'm sensitive to the strike zone, but I think the disclosing of things that are relevant are certainly germane to the committee. But the committee does have, direction here. If you feel that, our conversation is swaying a bit, let us know. But everything I hear is certainly helpful to the moment.
Well, one, for example, are we going to get into details of the cost structure at the Water Authority and how they need to transfer more to fixed costs? I mean, I'm happy to have that discussion because I think it's one that needs to be had, but I'm not sure that, this is the forum, since we, in the end, have no authority to make any decision on that. Same thing with, there's fixes that need to be done on the Bay Delta. Some people support them, some don't. But getting into the details of that and what needs to happen, I'm not sure, again, we have much authority to do anything about it. That's just my concern, is that we're, sort of broadening out instead of really focusing on the things LAFCO has authority, which is really just Fallbrook and Rainbow.
LAFCO has a lot of authority, Jack. It's not limited to just Fallbrook and Rainbow.
Well, I mean, in this context, I mean, if you want to take on the Bay Delta and the Water Authority rate structure, I'm happy to have that discussion. I'm not sure in the end those parties are gonna follow our lead.
All right. I don't see any more hands up. Dr. Hanneman, we've had a lot of interjection in between your presentation, so I'm not sure if there's more to continue or.
Yeah, there's a little, well, actually, before we go, let me just say this. No, you haven't asked me to opine on a solution to the Delta. But this is, as I mentioned, the reliability question is something I said I'd come back to, and I said at the beginning today, that's what I'm going to come back to next month. So I'll mention one other thing. The Colorado River has problems with climate change and stream flow. I also study those. I do think California's faces I think the states, the upper and lower basin states with the interior, are being more successful in moving to an agreement than California has been over the last century. And then California shows signs of doing that. And so while Colorado and the Colorado River and the Delta face the same problems, I think they're actually more severe for the Delta. But that's, I'll talk about the reliability next month. And there's an issue Jack raised. Do Fallbrook and Rainbow receive the benefits from the money they've paid to the authority that other member agency have? I'm going to get into that next month and in September when I come to the issue of an exit fee or whether there should be one. So that's very much, I'm aware of that issue. I haven't gotten around to addressing it. Actually, if you go to the next slide now, this is exactly one more, the next slide. Yes. So this is the point I wanted to make. These challenges face the similar challenges confronting Met to the authority. As I say here, I think Met has a less reliable supply from its core sources. Met will also face the challenge of sales falling off because of increased local supplies. And Met faces a significant financial commitment with the Delta fix. And that's why I think, these are reasons why I think Met's cost structure will change. It's succeeded in being 100% variable for its member agencies. I think that will change. Next slide. So I'm just going to have a few slides. I'm not getting into any substance. Next slide. So this is information. These are excerpts from the authorities' memorandum of last year. These are just two quotes. That it has $21 billion in debt. 19.1 out of the 21 billion are, I'm sorry, next. So this shows the breakdown between the contractual supply obligations of 19.1 and other items. So the contractual obligations are 90%. Next slide. And these are the take or pay commitments for water from the Colorado River and for Carlsbad. And Carlsbad is in round terms 3 billion and 16 billion is the Colorado River water. Next slide. This shows the substantial capital spending in the around 2000, in the 2000s. Next slide. And this is just a list of some of the major investment projects. Again, I'm beginning to look at these. Next slide. And so I'm going to end up with just 2 or 3 more slides. So the phrase exit fee, and now realize is the wrong phrase. The correct phrase is a termination fee. I'm not saying there should be one. So I wrote an article. I collaborated with a longtime Australian friend, an Australian economist, and we wrote a major piece on the history of water marketing in Australia. We wrote it in 2018 and 2019. It appeared just over a year ago. And one of the items was that when water marketing opened up in Australia, so let me explain. I'm just doing these 2 slides to describe what happened in Australia. The circumstances is not identical, but I'm not pretending that, I just wanted to explain the context. So when Australia, when water marketing got going, it got going slowly in the 1990s, but it took off around 2000. Australia has large irrigation districts tightly controlled by the state government, much more tightly controlled than irrigation districts are in the western states of the US. And when water marketing got going in some of the large irrigation districts, farmers wanted to sell their water to users outside the district. So it's not the same as a detachment, but operationally it's similar. They wanted to, the districts were, should we say, not happy. And they started imposing caps on like 2% of your allotment could be transferred, and they imposed exit fees. And because irrigation districts in Australia are tightly controlled by the state government, the irrigation districts needed state government approval and received it. So Australia created around 2000, an agency that's a little like the Federal Trade Commission, but much more powerful than any federal agency in this country. It goes by the name, the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission. It has intervened to force Melbourne to change its water rates. It has much greater power than any federal agency to correct bad economic decision-making. I mean, what it considers bad economic decision. And it intervened in these fees. And the next slide is just, if you can show that, it's just 3 chunks of text which describe what happens. And when the ACCC intervened, it forbade irrigation districts to impose exit fees. It allowed them to impose a termination fee, and it capped the fee at 10 times the annual fixed charge. I'm not saying this has specific relevance for what's going on here. I just wanted to explain the terminology. And now I want to move to the last slide, which is just my concluding observations for today. So this whole topic of what benefits did Fallbrook and Rainbow receive? Did they pay more disproportionately to the benefits? What do they owe? Do they have commitments? What they are? I'm now going to start thinking through these issues. But I just wanted to emphasize, this is difficult. So first of all, we have 2 vulnerabilities, financial vulnerability and physical vulnerability. And these kind of work against one another. You can get, if you're a supplier, you can get more financial reliability by spending money to get a reliable supply. But that's bad for your members. And the converse is true. So this trade-off, a more reliable supply is more expensive, is a fundamental challenge. Water infrastructure is much more difficult to finance than any other utility infrastructure. And the last thing is, this is also a matter of governance. And this is governance within the authority. It's also governance within Metropolitan Water District. And the one comment I would make is the way water agencies throughout the United States, it's not just Southern California, the way they tend to work is they have weighted voting where the weights are backward looking based on how much water you've bought over some period of time in the past. And water agencies like Metropolitan, like the authority, face major investment choices. And in some sense, it would work better if the voting on those decisions were weighted more towards the users who will be using more of the water in future that's being financed. Because of this disjunction, you have old water that exists a long time ago that's cheap, that's much more variable cost, and you have the new investment decisions that are going to be expensive that at first are going to be heavy fixed cost. I'm done.
Thank you, Dr. Handman. Just wanted to check in with the members of the committee if there is any concluding comments or questions for the professor. Tom?
Yeah, just real quick, and I think the cost versus reliability question is an important one. And as in our area, especially in Rainbow, which we're primarily agricultural, it breaks the back of the only economy we have up here. And so for us, it's to keep our farmers alive. We've got to deal with that. They are much more resilient to shorter term supply interruptions than longer term, and they can't afford to make investments to have hyper reliability like biotech or tourism or other urban areas might enjoy. That's why most of our large irrigators are on the TSAR program and don't participate in some of those reliability costs. So I think it's important as this ad hoc committee and the commission looks at it, that reliability under LAFCO policies is those questions should be made at the local level. And our boards have analyzed this in great detail and are extremely comfortable with the level of reliability that MET can provide to not only us, but all the rest of Southern California.
Thanks, Tom. Is there anybody else at this time that would like to end with any further questions or comments? Jack, there you go. You snuck one in on me.
Thanks, Adam. It would just be helpful, now that, Dr. Hanneman's gotten a chance to really look at all the detailed information, sort of has a framework. If we could at least maybe lay out, sort of a rough plan and timeline, and sort of milestones going forward would be sort of very helpful to me, to sort of explain where we're at and where we're going. And so I just maybe, I don't know if it's some Adam, you and Keen and Dr. Hanneman could work on, but just something that lays out, all right, here's what we plan to get to by this point. Here's the issues we're going to try to tackle. Specifically, you just kind of lay that plan out, just because I felt like after the last meeting, we were getting to maybe a more focused point. And I think part of it may have just been in the concept of bringing up some issues that won't be answered, but are just sort of peripheral issues that Dr. Hanneman thought it was important to note. I'm just a little worried that we're bringing some of those into this, and we'll get caught in a 6-month argument about the future of the Bay Delta. So that's just a question, if we could kind of lay that out.
Yeah. Thanks for that comment question, Jack. And maybe I can set the table a little right now, because I think we had some internal discussions about that prior to this meeting. But from what I gather, and let me just preface my comments by saying that as the moderator of this meeting and tasked by Keen and LAFCO to shepherd this project to the finish line and to moderate this ad hoc committee, my end goal remains to wrap up this ad hoc committee by the end of the year at a December meeting. I presented and provided everybody a revised schedule at our May meeting. I'm more than happy to send that out again. As Dr. Hanneman indicated today, I think his work is still a work in progress. There's a lot of data that he's still trying to collect from the member agencies. I think he's indicated there needs to be some further interaction with the member agencies, and I'll be more than happy to facilitate that. He did mention it may slow his work down a little in the process, but I can assure you with my communication with him, we will remain on schedule. It may delay some of the product that we're going to see a month or a month and a half, but I'm committed to keep this thing on track. And so just to set the table a little, I think the revised schedule that I presented in May showed that we would receive some sort of draft report come August. It sounds like that's going to be a little delayed as Dr. Hanneman continues to work on his analysis. And so what I was thinking is that, the month of August, he's going to continue to work on his data and flushing out some of the things that he needs from you guys. And then at our September meeting, these 3 topics that Keen had mentioned, the 3 memorandums, will start materializing into one document, as Dr. Hanneman has indicated to some of you priorly offline. And so my hopes is, and my attempt and goal is, Dr. Hanneman will have that draft comprehensive report to us by September. We can have a meeting at that date. We can interact, we can engage, we can comment. We will have some sort of final report to look at come October. Then we can kick in a 45-day public review period and still make that end of November or early December final ad hoc committee for this committee to weigh in and make some sort of formal conclusion. So Dr. Hanneman, I think I see you nodding your head.
That's
I think that's
correct.
comfortable with your own timeline as you do this. And if there's anything more that you would like to add at that, please feel free to do so.
So I'll just add two comments. One is, rather than three separate reports on the three questions, there'll be one report. There'll be chapters, there'll be three chapters, but also there'll be some sort of introduction describing the context. And part of what I was doing today was sort of talking about the context, because there are larger issues. LAFCO can't decide them, but I think it's important both for the advisory committee and for the LAFCO staff and for the LAFCO commission to understand the context and to understand which of these issues are kind of unique to the personalities, as it were, of the agencies involved, and which of these are generic issues. So you have to deal with them. It's not just that party A hates party B, and these are endemic problems which everyone faces. So there'll be one report with some context, and then answers or recommendations or analyses on each of the three questions and some sort of conclusion. So there'll be an integrated report. And I'm sort of I've been moving towards that today. That's the first thing. And the second thing is, yes, you need the timetable. It's important, and I'm not going to let you down. But there's more interaction right now, and I think in the rest of this month with staff, with the authority, I hope, with you, Tom, and with Jack and with Nick, just ironing out things. So it'll slow down. And then I'm going to be away for 8 days of vacation with my wife's family on the East Coast at the first week of August. So there'll be more, I'll be able to pull things together for the draft report more effectively for the September meeting. And I will honor the commitment to meet the timetable that LAFCO wants.
Thank you, Dr. Hanneman. Sandy, do you have a question or comment? Sorry, you're muted again, so twice a month.
Just to an earlier point that Dr. Hanneman made when we started out today, and I don't think it can get lost on this group, which is this is precedent setting. This is very complex. I think the stage setting that was done today was wholly appropriate for an issue of this magnitude. Talking about a critical issue like water supply reliability and costs going forward, and it is complicated, and has not been done anywhere else in the state of California. And so it is going to take time, and unfortunately that's just what it is. When Dr. Hanneman, you said that agencies should change to be looking forward. I would support to you that when these investments were made in this reliability, these agencies stood and put their hand up for them and supported moving forward with the projects because they believed the need was there. So it's kind of a chicken and an egg situation. And as you suggest, it takes many years to get these projects to fruition. And do we have complete clarity at the moment that they're done? No. But I think it's important to remember how we got here at this point. And I certainly would like all this done tomorrow. It's taken an inordinate amount of time for everyone, including our staff and so forth, but it has to be looked at thoroughly and thoughtfully given the magnitude of these issues. And it's not just a simple matter to just be disposed of quickly. So just wanted to make those comments.
Thank you, Sandy. Jack?
Yeah, sorry, just to follow up on a couple of things. So one is we haven't supported all the investments. So for example, Fallbrook Public Utility District didn't support the desal project exactly because we were concerned about the cost reliability. But the structure of the water authority is such that it doesn't matter what Fallbrook Public Utility District thought about the project. Once the agency voted for it, we paid for it, right? And so that relationship changes somewhat within the structure of Eastern versus the water authority. And that's part of why, we pursued this. So there are some differences. And just because someone voted for something or against something, that entity didn't agree also that they would continue to pay the cost forever based on how the water authority is cost structured. So if that was like Dr. Hanneman mentioned, that would be one way to do it, is make everyone agree to a financial commitment going forward. But that isn't the structure of the water authority. And I don't see it changing where we're going to shift those costs from those, higher water users to the other agencies to reallocate those costs. So I think it's great we're talking about these things and raising these issues. I'm just not sure that they're going to get addressed within this body, and that's my main concern. I also support the analysis we're doing, and my reason for just suggesting to have a time frame is Tom and I have done this, and this analysis has been done. We hired an independent consultant who used to work for the Water Authority, Ken Weinberg, and you'll see that in our application. We've done other analysis within our application. We support the analysis Dr. Hanneman's doing. We just at some point want to move this to completion. That's it. But we appreciate, I appreciate the discussion and the analysis and support, getting to an end and having that discussion.
Thanks, Jack. And I'll just reemphasize, I'm committed to get this to the finish line and keep it in the timeline that's been proposed. So I don't see any other hands are raised. So I think that concludes. Oh, Gary.
No, can you hear me? My phone had went dead. I just wanted to jump in from the standpoint of being a regional cooperator. And I don't think any of the decisions that got us to where we're at today were done in a silo. They were done with input from, whether it be surveys, member agencies, in an agreement on how things would go as we move forward, including input from the San Diego County grand jury and others. But I think it's important that we are a region, we're stronger as one. That's some of our different issues. I think some of the questions today raised some of the information today also raised some different questions that'll be worthwhile to follow up on, including the former general manager at MWD and some of his comments on some of the things. I wanted to follow up on those, but at the same point in time, I also wanted to respect Dr. Hanneman's quiet time to not slow him down. So maybe as we move forward at this point, I'll go ahead and put some things into writing. I'll shoot them to you, Adam, and then you can distribute them as appropriate, but some questions that I think are well worthwhile within the process.
Thanks, Gary, and I'm more than happy to work with you on that. So I think that concludes this item for today. I do want to check with LAFCO staff, both Tammy and Erica, real quick, since this is an informational item and there are members of the public participating. Were there any preset comments or questions that were provided? And did we have anybody during the meeting submit anything needed to be addressed at this time?
We received no pre-registered speakers for this item.
Thank you. And Erica, did we have anything submitted?
As of right now, no live email comments.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Okay, that concludes that item for today. Okay, we're approaching the noon high time hour, so I would like to kind of speed through the next 3 issues and items in respect to everybody's time. But we'll move on to business item 5C, which is the executive officer report. The advisory committee will receive an update from the executive officer on the current municipal service review for the Fallbrook-Rainbow region and its coordinated review with the reorganization proposals discussed today. And so in the theme of baseball, I think Linda Heckenkamp is pinch hitting for Keen for this item. So Linda, why don't you please take it away?
Thanks, Adam. Again, Linda Heckenkamp, local government analyst. I just have a quick update for all of you. LAFCO staff is working towards completing the draft MSR for the Fallbrook-Rainbow region. This includes Fallbrook PUD, Rainbow MWD, North County Fire, and also a newly added CSA 81, which is a county dependent district, otherwise known as Fallbrook Local Parks. The Fallbrook and Rainbow draft MSRs have been circulated to their districts for administrative review. Ed Sprague has been hired as our fire consultant to dive into the North County FPD. So we will have an admin draft for their district as well pretty soon. Staff is targeting the August commission meeting as a soft deadline, but depending on the administrative draft period, it will most likely be in October for the draft presentation. Shortly after, we will circulate the draft to the ad hoc committee as well. And that's my quick update. Thank you for hanging on.
Thanks, Linda. Really appreciate it. Are there any members of the committee that would like, Tom?
Linda, it was my understanding previously that the San Luis Rey MWD was going to be as part of this MSR for our region. Is that not the case? Because I was speaking to someone from there and they hadn't heard anything yet, and I told them to get a hold of you. I'm not sure if they have yet.
Thanks, Tom. I did get their email and I'll be following up with them. We did revise the work plan for the MSRs at the last commission meeting. So there's a little bit of editing going on, but I will follow up with them soon.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Is there any other committee members at this time that have a question or a comment to this item? Okay, having seen none, I will check real quick again with LAFCO staff. Tammy and Erica, are there any pre-submitted or current comments from the members of the public on this item?
No, none received for this item.
No email comments either.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And that concludes this item for today. Move on to the next business item, which is 5D, future schedule reminder. This was, I just wanted to take a quick opportunity to remind the committee members of the next two ad hoc committee dates, which are August 16th and September 20th. I wanted to make note of those so obviously everybody could calendarize those dates, but also wanted to make note that the August 16th meeting we are trying to hold in person. And so I'm tasked to find a meeting location for all of us to gather into. I would suspect, and the likely candidates of meeting points would either be the County Administration Center where LAFCO currently holds their meetings, or at downtown Pacific Highway, or the County Operations Center up in Kearney Mesa where the Planning Commission chambers are. So subject to one of those rooms availability, I think that's where we will hold our next meeting, and subject to change should that not be available, then we'll work on another location. But I think we're all kind of close and used to this virtual world, but I think there might be some advantages to finally meeting as a group in person and having that dialogue and conversation face to face, and also meeting Dr. Hanneman in person and having some dialogue with him as well. So again, August 16th and September 20th, both starting at 10 a.m. That is the goal, and they are both designed to meet in person. So is there any questions or comments or concerns with those dates, or anybody's availability to meet in person?
We have,
if you're unable to meet in person, is the virtual still an option? I know the governor allows it through the end of September, but within this group, that'd be an option if we can't be in person.
Yeah, Gary, those are logistics we'll work out with the IT team, but it is going to be something that we'll have to have a component of if we're going to meet in person, then just also have the dynamic that anybody that'd like to still participate virtually could do so. So we will work on that and have that a part of the meeting.
We have lots of meeting space up here in Fallbrook too, just in case you
Perfect.
get any others.
Okay, that concludes that item. I'd like to move on to business item 5E, which is the agenda setting for next meeting, which is the August 16th meeting. I don't have anything to add at this point in time, and I just wanted to check with any committee members if there's a topic that they'd like to see submitted as a part of the conversation at our next meeting. Okay, having seen none, that concludes this item as well. And that moves into business item number 6, which is the adjournment. So I'd like to thank everybody for their participation today. Dr. Hanneman, thank you for the extensive report. Look forward to working with you and the member agencies as we continue to work on your analysis. And I'd like to adjourn this meeting today, Monday, July 12th at 12:05 p.m. And thanks again.
Thanks, everybody. See you IRL next time.
Yes. Bye-bye.
Bye.